The cost of living, CPI, and the inflation monster. John is cleaning out the attic of his workshop when he finds a dusty, yellowed piece of paper tucked inside an old keyboard case. It's a receipt from 1974. His grandfather had purchased a top-of-the-line mechanical typewriter for exactly $40. John looks at the sleek, modern keyboard he just built, which retails for $400. He pauses and thinks, was my grandfather 10 times richer than me because things were so cheap? Or is my $400 actually worth less than his $40? To solve this mystery, John needs to move beyond the total output of the nation and look at the price of life itself. He turns to N. Gregory Mankiw's lessons on the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, to understand the invisible force that changes the value of every dollar in his pocket: inflation. John learns that the CPI is a measure of the overall cost of the goods and services bought by a typical consumer. To calculate it, the government's statistical detectives conduct a massive project. First, they fix the basket. They determine which prices are most important to the average person. If the typical stickman spends more on rent and food than on custom keyboards, then the prices of housing and groceries should carry more weight in the index. John imagines a giant shopping cart representing the average life, filled with a specific amount of bread, gas, clothing, and entertainment. Next, the detectives find the prices. Every month, they check the prices of every item in that giant basket. Then, they compute the basket's cost. John sees that by keeping the contents of the cart exactly the same while the prices change, the government can isolate the effect of price movements from the effect of people buying different things. Finally, they choose a base year to act as a benchmark and calculate the index using a simple ratio. The price of the basket in the current year divided by the price of the basket in the base year, multiplied by 100. John tries the math himself. If his stickman basket cost $100 in the base year and costs $110 today, the CPI is 110. This means the cost of living has risen by 10%. This percentage change from one period to the next is what economists call the inflation rate. John realizes that inflation is like a monster that slowly nibbles away at the edges of his dollar bills. If his income stays the same while the CPI goes up, his purchasing power, the amount of stuff he can actually buy, is shrinking. However, as John digs deeper, he realizes that the CPI isn't a perfect mirror of reality. Mankiw points out three main problems that John needs to watch out for. The first is substitution bias. If the price of luxury mechanical switches skyrockets, John might start using cheaper plastic ones instead. But the CPI basket is fixed. It assumes John is still buying the expensive switches, which makes the reported cost of living look higher than what John is actually experiencing. The second problem is the introduction of new goods. When a revolutionary new wireless technology for keyboards is invented, it makes John's life better and more efficient. But it takes time for the basket to include these new items. Finally, there is unmeasured quality change. If a keyboard costs the same as last year, but now lasts 10 years instead of 2, John is getting more value for his money. This is a hidden drop in the cost of living that the CPI often misses. Now, John returns to his grandfather's $40 receipt. How does he compare that 1974 price to today's money? He uses a time travel formula for money. To turn old dollars into today's dollars, John takes the amount from the past and multiplies it by the ratio of today's price level to the old price level. If the CPI was 50 in 1974 and is 250 today, his grandfather's $40 would be worth $200 in today's terms, calculated as $40 multiplied by 250 divided by 50. John smiles. His grandfather wasn't necessarily richer. The scale of the economy was just smaller. But the inflation monster doesn't just affect prices. It affects John's savings and loans, too. This introduces John to the difference between nominal and real interest rates. John has $1,000 in a savings account that pays a 5% interest rate. At the end of the year, he has $1,050. This 5% is the nominal interest rate. It tells him how fast the number of dollars in his account is growing. But if inflation was 10% during that same year, The things John wants to buy are now 10% more expensive. Even though he has more dollars, those dollars buy less than his original $1,000 did a year ago. His real interest rate is actually negative 5%. This is a massive wake-up call for John. He realizes that to grow his wealth, he must outrun the inflation monster. If he isn't earning a return that is higher than the inflation rate, he is effectively getting poorer every day, even if his bank balance is going up. This understanding changes how John prices his keyboards and how he plans for the future. He no longer looks at a dollar as a fixed unit of value. He sees it as a vessel of purchasing power that can expand or contract depending on the heat of the economy. John hangs the 1974 receipt on his wall as a reminder. He is no longer afraid of the inflation monster because he knows how to measure it. By understanding the CPI and the difference between nominal and real values, John can protect his workshop and his future. He knows that in the global stage of macroeconomics, the cost of living is a moving target, and a smart stickman always keeps his eyes on the real value, not just the numbers on the paper. He closes his ledger, ready to adjust his prices and his investments to ensure that his hard-earned wealth stays ahead of the curve, preserving his ability to build, create, and thrive in an ever-changing world.